The battlefield was chaos, laser blasts streaking across the sky, the sound of alien weapons discharging in rapid bursts. The protagonist, a soldier named Ethan Ward, ducked behind a fallen debris wall, his heart pounding in his chest. His rifle felt like dead weight in his hands as he watched the alien forces advancing. The Zerak had no mercy. Their towering forms, armed with advanced energy weapons, easily overpowered the human defense lines. Ethan's unit had been barely holding their ground, fighting for their lives, their planet's future. It was a losing battle, and Ethan could feel it in his bones. They were outmatched, outgunned, and utterly outclassed. Humanity had only recently been inducted into the Galactic Federation's ranks, and even with their training, they were far from prepared to face a foe like the Zerak. But Ethan wasn't like the others. There was something about him that set him apart, though he couldn't explain it. His mind always seemed sharper, his reflexes faster. His instructors had noticed it when he'd first joined the military, but they'd just written it off as natural talent. Even though he struggled to fully comprehend his own abilities, it was clear to those around him that Ethan had the potential to rise above the rest. But in the midst of this war, it felt like there was more at play. Something beyond his control, something pulling at the very essence of his being. Taking a deep breath, Ethan sprinted from cover, instinctively dodging a barrage of plasma fire. He barely heard the screeching hum of an incoming projectile before it exploded in the ground beside him, sending him tumbling forward. His mind raced as his body twisted midair, narrowly avoiding the debris. He crashed onto the hard ground but didn't feel the impact. His muscles, as if guided by an unseen force, absorbed the blow. He was already rolling, his body bouncing back with unnatural fluidity, as though he'd been in the field for years instead of a few months. His training had been rushed, barely enough for a soldier to survive. But right now, his instincts were something more. Something different. The Zerak warriors charged toward him. He could see them clearly now, their armor gleaming under the sun, their weapons glowing with dangerous intensity. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest, but his mind was calm, too calm. It was like time slowed down around him, his vision sharpening as if the world itself had become a puzzle to be solved. He could predict the movements of his enemies before they made them, could see the exact trajectory of their attacks with eerie precision. His rifle lifted without him thinking about it. A single shot rang out, piercing through the lead Zerek's head, and the alien crumpled to the ground. Ethan barely registered what had happened. He was already moving again, a streak of lightning among the enemy. His feet hit the ground like they were moving through water, every step calculated, every muscle honed to perfection. The Zerak fired back, but he was already gone, his body weaving effortlessly between their shots. As Ethan gunned down another Zerak, his attention was drawn to something glimmering in the wreckage of a nearby ship. At first, he thought it was a piece of broken tech, but when he approached, a strange energy pulsed from it. The object was an ancient, weathered artifact, embedded with mysterious symbols that seemed to hum with energy. There was an unnatural pull toward it, as if the artifact was calling him. Cautiously, Ethan reached out and touched the surface. The moment his fingers brushed against it, the ground seemed to shake beneath him. His vision blurred as a rush of energy surged into him, coursing through his veins, igniting every nerve in his body. The power was overwhelming, and for a moment, he feared he might lose control. But then, just as suddenly as it had come, it stopped. Ethan stood there, breathing heavily, his mind whirling. The battlefield seemed different now. The air felt thicker, charged with the same energy he had just absorbed. Ethan glanced down at his hands, feeling the subtle pulse of power within him. It was more than strength. It was something else, something vast and untapped. The artifact had changed him. There was no going back now. But what did this mean? And what had he just unleashed? The battlefield was still raging around him, but Ethan's eyes burned with a new resolve. He didn't know how, but this artifact, this power, was going to make the difference. Humanity's time had come, And whether they were ready or not, they were about to become something far greater than anyone had ever expected. The aftermath of the battle left the air thick with the acrid smell of burned metal and ozone. The ground was littered with wreckage from both human and Zerek forces. The battle for the Federation outpost on the fringes of the galaxy had been a desperate, brutal affair. And although the humans had made significant progress, it came at an enormous cost. Ethan stood amid the chaos, his pulse still quick from the rush of combat. His body hummed with energy, unnatural, raw power coursing through him. But it didn't feel like enough. The human forces had barely held their position, but at least the Zerek advance had been momentarily halted. Yet the victory felt hollow. Ethan's heart was still racing, his mind still reeling from the artifact's power. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew something inside of him had changed. The war seemed larger now, more complex, and he was no longer just a soldier. He felt like something else entirely. A voice crackled over his comms, snapping him back to reality. "Ward, report in." It was Captain Daniels, his commanding officer. "Ethan here, Captain," he responded, his voice steady despite the storm of thoughts flooding his mind. "We're holding the line. The Zerek are retreating for now." "Good. We need to regroup. Reinforcements are on their way. But we got a window of time to take control of the base," Daniels ordered. "Meet up with the others at the secondary command post. I'll brief you there." "Roger that," Ethan said, glancing around. His unit was scattered, regrouping wherever they could. The battlefield wasn't safe, but there was no time to waste. He turned toward the command post, ignoring the aches in his muscles, feeling an unnatural strength pushing him forward. As Ethan made his way toward the rendezvous point, his thoughts kept drifting back to the artifact. He knew it wasn't just some relic. Something about it felt alive, almost sentient. The way it had reacted to his touch. It wasn't a coincidence. His mind raced with questions. Where had it come from? What was its purpose? And more importantly, how was he the one who had unlocked its power? The quiet murmurs of the other soldiers were drowned out as Ethan's senses sharpened. His vision became clearer, his hearing more acute. His body felt like it was brimming with potential, each step a testament to newfound strength. The difference was almost disorienting. He was moving faster than he ever had before, his feet gliding effortlessly over the broken terrain. It wasn't just physical. His mind was sharper too, able to process information and make decisions with an almost frightening ease. He reached the secondary command post where Daniels and the others had gathered. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a new air of optimism. The Federation troops had gained ground, something that hadn't happened in weeks of struggle. But even as they celebrated, there was a shadow hanging over them. The Zerek were regrouping, and this momentary victory might be fleeting. Daniels caught sight of Ethan approaching and waved him over. "Ward, good timing. We need to talk strategy." Ethan walked over, his mind still buzzing. "I'm listening." "We've got one shot at taking full control of this base, and we can't afford to waste it. If we do this right, we might be able to strike a blow against the Zerek that will slow their advance across the entire sector," Daniels said. "But we'll need every soldier on their feet, and I'll need you to lead the charge." Ethan froze for a moment, the weight of Daniels' words sinking in. The commander was asking for more than just leadership. He was asking for something extraordinary. Ethan had seen combat, but this was different. This was more than strategy. It was a test of will, a challenge that required not just tactics, but sheer determination. The Federation forces had already been pushed to their limits, and now the fate of the mission rested on his shoulders. "I'll lead," Ethan said, his voice steady. But as he spoke, his mind flashed with the knowledge that the power inside him was something no one else could understand, not even Daniels. He had tapped into something beyond human limits, something that no soldier should have to bear alone. The plan was simple, a direct assault on the Zerek command center within the base. Ethan's newfound abilities would give him the edge he needed to push through the most heavily fortified positions. His unit would follow. and together they crushed the remaining Zerek forces before they had a chance to regroup. As the briefing concluded, Ethan turned away from the group, heading toward the preparation area. His body thrummed with energy. His mind raced with tactics, strategies, and the nagging question of just how much power the artifact had truly given him. He wasn't sure where this path would lead, but one thing was certain. He wasn't the same soldier who had joined the Federation just months ago. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready. And the galaxy wasn't prepared for what humanity was about to become. Ethan stood at the edge of the command center, the briefing echoing in his mind, as he watched the preparations unfold. His fellow soldiers were gearing up for the assault on the Zerek command center. Despite the adrenaline surging through his veins, a part of him felt strangely detached, as if he were observing from a distance. The battle ahead seemed almost trivial compared to what he had experienced since touching the artifact. His body hummed with energy, every muscle and fiber tuned to perfection, but it wasn't just physical. It was as if his mind had expanded, able to process more, think faster. He could almost see the patterns of the battlefield in ways he never had before. But with that power came uncertainty. As he walked through the makeshift corridors of the command center, a sense of foreboding settled over him. The humans were focused on the immediate conflict with the Zerek, but Ethan knew there was something deeper, something more hidden, at play. The artifact had unlocked something that shouldn't have been possible, something beyond his control, and he had a nagging feeling that the war, with all its bloodshed and strategy, was only a small part of a much larger scheme. "Ethan, you all right?" A voice broke him from his thoughts. It was Lieutenant Harper, one of the few people Ethan trusted without hesitation. She was looking at him with concern, her eyes scanning him as though trying to figure out what was going on behind the calm exterior. She'd known him since their early days in training, and she could always tell when something was off. "Yeah, just thinking," Ethan said, giving her a half-smile. "Ready for the assault?" Harper nodded, but there was something in her expression that made Ethan pause. She wasn't just worried about the mission. She was worried about him. The way he had changed since that strange encounter with the artifact didn't go unnoticed. The way he moved now, the way his mind operated at a higher level, it was hard to miss. "You've been different, Ethan," she said, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Ever since that battle, after you found that thing. Are you sure you're okay? You're not pushing yourself too hard, are you?" Ethan met her gaze, feeling a sense of unease. How could he explain the changes, the way his entire sense of reality had shifted in such a short time? How could he tell her that he didn't even fully understand what was happening to him? He opened his mouth, but before he could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. "Ward, Harper." It was Captain Daniels, his voice firm, but urgent. "Time to move out. We've got a narrow window of opportunity to hit the Zerek where it hurts." Without another word, Ethan and Harper fell into formation, their focus shifting to the mission at hand. The Zerek command center was only a few miles from their position, a heavily fortified location that housed the last remnants of the enemy's leadership in the sector. The humans had the advantage of surprise, but it would be short-lived. As they moved out, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. As they neared the target zone, Ethan's instincts, heightened beyond anything he'd ever experienced, spiked. It wasn't the physical danger that unsettled him. It was something far deeper, a growing presence, like a shadow creeping over the battlefield. Something was watching them, and it wasn't the Zerek. Suddenly, his communicator buzzed in his ear. It was a secure transmission, one that shouldn't have come through Federation channels. "Ward, I see you," the voice crackled, distorted but unmistakable. "You don't know it yet, but you've crossed a line. That artifact you touched, it's more than just a relic. You've just opened the door to something far bigger than you can understand." Ethan froze, his heart racing. The voice wasn't human. It was cold, calculating, and he felt a chill run down his spine. "Who is this?" Ethan demanded, his voice low and controlled, though his mind was a whirl of questions. "You'll find out soon enough," the voice said with a laugh that sent a shiver through him. "Just remember, we've been watching you, and we've been waiting. Don't get too comfortable in your new power, Ward. There's always a price." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Ethan standing in stunned silence. Harper glanced at him, her expression confused. "What was that?" "I don't know," Ethan replied, the weight of the conversation settling on his chest like 1,000 pounds. Something had changed. He didn't fully understand who or what was behind the transmission, but he knew one thing. The artifact had drawn attention, dangerous attention, and he had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole went. He had to focus. There was no turning back now. The Zerak were waiting, but this new threat was lurking in the shadows, watching. He had to survive both the war and the unknown enemy who had just revealed themselves. With a determined nod, Ethan steeled himself for what lay ahead. The Zerak Command Center was a fortress of steel and energy shields, built into the side of a jagged mountain range. Its defenses were impenetrable to most, but for Ethan, who had experienced a strange evolution since the artifact's power had flowed through him, it didn't seem like an obstacle. As the assault team approached, Ethan's senses were on high alert. His mind was racing, processing every detail, every sound, every shift in the environment. He could hear the faint hum of energy shields and the distant footsteps of Zerak sentries patrolling the outer perimeter. To the rest of the team, this was just another fortified position to crack. But to Ethan, it felt like an intricate puzzle waiting to be solved. He could feel the power in his blood, pushing him forward, urging him to take action. His mind wasn't just thinking about the enemy in front of him. It was calculating potential strategies and probabilities faster than anyone around him could comprehend. "Ward," Captain Daniels called, snapping him out of his thoughts. "You're up. Lead us through." Ethan nodded, though his mind was elsewhere. The voice from the mysterious transmission still echoed in his ears, like a constant reminder that something much darker was watching. Something that wanted him to fail. The artifact's power had changed him, but the more he used it, the more he felt like he was slipping away from the person he once was. He turned to his squad, the weight of their trust heavy on his shoulders. They had no idea how much his abilities had evolved in such a short time, and he wasn't sure how to explain it. He wasn't sure he could control it. But there was no time for doubt. They were already in the thick of it. "Stay close," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We breached the outer wall in 5. With the squad in position, Ethan focused. His vision sharpened even further as he studied the Zerak defenses. It wasn't just a matter of strategy anymore. It was instinct. He saw the weak points in the wall, the blind spots in the energy field, and he felt the perfect moment to strike. He nodded to his squad, signaling them to move. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the first set of barriers. His legs propelled him with unnatural speed, each stride taking him farther than he'd ever imagined possible. The Zerak sentries didn't even see him coming. He dove, rolling across the ground with a fluidity that felt almost unnatural, landing behind the nearest sentry and taking him down before the alien even had time to react. The rest of the squad followed his lead, moving swiftly and silently as they neutralized the outer defenses. "Clear," Ethan said, his voice almost distant as he continued to survey the battlefield with a sharpness that made even the seasoned soldiers uneasy. His mind wasn't just analyzing the terrain. It was reading the enemy's next moves, anticipating their every action. As they breached deeper into the facility, the Zerak responded, sending more reinforcements to counterattack. But Ethan was already 10 steps ahead. Every time the Zerak fired, he was already ducking and weaving, his body moving in ways that seemed preordained. He didn't just dodge their shots. He was anticipating them. He moved like a shadow, too fast for the Zerak to track, too precise for them to land a hit. The rest of the team, watching in awe, struggled to keep up with his pace. Ethan didn't care. He was focused, hyper-focused, on the task at hand. Every movement, Every strike felt like it was happening in perfect synchronization with the universe itself. His weapons seemed to almost work in harmony with his body, a seamless extension of his will. In a matter of moments, they had reached the heart of the command center. The main Zarek leader, a towering beast clad in dark, ornate armor, stood waiting for them, flanked by his elite guard. The moment Ethan stepped into the room, the leader snarled, raising his massive energy blade. The air crackled with tension. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest, but his mind was clear. He wasn't just fighting the Zarek leader. He was fighting fate itself. The artifact's power was growing within him, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he was ready for it. But there was no turning back now. He couldn't back down. The Zarek leader roared and charged, but Ethan was already in motion. His body shifted with lightning speed, evading the leader's sweeping strikes with a precision that left even his elite guard confused. Each of Ethan's movements was calculated, every strike a lethal counter to the Zarek's attacks. As he closed the distance, he felt the power within him surge. He wasn't just moving faster or hitting harder, he was feeling the battlefield. It was as if the entire room, the fight itself, was unfolding in slow motion around him. With a single fluid motion, Ethan disarmed the Zarek leader, sending the massive blade clattering to the floor. Before the alien could react, Ethan's fist drove into his chest with a force that sent the leader sprawling backward. The room fell silent. The Zarak warriors stood frozen, unsure of how to proceed. Their commander lay defeated at Ethan's feet, and the human soldier's power was undeniable. For a moment, Ethan stood over the fallen leader, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he tried to process what had just happened. His hands were trembling, not from exertion, but from the overwhelming realization that he was no longer just human. He was something else, something far more dangerous. And the galaxy wasn't ready for what he was about to become. The Zarek leader lay motionless at Ethan's feet, his massive form crumpled in defeat. The elite guard around him hesitated, their weapons drawn but their resolve faltering. Ethan stood over the fallen commander, chest heaving with adrenaline. His body felt like it was on fire, the energy from the artifact surging through him in waves. The battlefield around him seemed almost surreal. The world slowed, the hum of energy weapons, and the distant shouts of soldiers muted as if they were happening in another reality. Ethan's mind raced as the power inside him pulsed with intensity. The artifact had given him abilities he could scarcely understand. But what did it all mean? How far could this power take him? And more disturbingly, how much control did he have? He wasn't just feeling stronger. His senses were heightened to an almost supernatural level. He could hear every breath from the soldiers around him, the subtle hum of the energy shields, the beat of his own heart. The overwhelming sensation was intoxicating, but there was a deep unease growing within him. His body was evolving at an unnatural pace, but where was it leading? What price would he pay for this power? Ethan, Harper's voice cut through his thoughts, laced with uncertainty. She had approached cautiously, her eyes darting from the defeated Zarek leader to Ethan. What just happened? You took him down so fast. You're different. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at the motionless Zarak, and then at the rest of the squad, who were now regrouping around the command center. They were all watching him with a mixture of awe and confusion. But in their eyes, Ethan saw something else. Fear. Did we win? Harper asked again, her voice tight. Ethan finally shook himself out of the haze. Yeah, we won. But even as the words left his mouth, his gut twisted with doubt. The Zarak had been defeated, yes, but the battle wasn't over. He could feel it, that creeping sense of dread that told him something far more dangerous was lurking just beyond the horizon. This victory felt hollow. There was more to this war than the Zarak, the artifact, the strange transmission, and the growing power inside him. We need to secure the base, Captain Daniel said, stepping forward. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. He had seen what Ethan was capable of, and it had shaken him. "Move out. The Zerak are scattered, but we need to make sure there are no surprises." Ethan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Something was off, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. His heightened senses tingled with a gnawing awareness. Just as the squad began moving forward to secure the command center, a loud, piercing shriek echoed from the depths of the facility. It reverberated through the walls, sending a shockwave of fear through the group. The Zerak had been silenced for now, but whatever was behind that scream felt like something far worse. "What the hell was that?" Lieutenant Harper muttered, her voice trained. Ethan's gaze narrowed, his senses sharpening to a razor's edge. The air was thick with an unnatural static, the hum of energy shifting into something darker. There was no time to hesitate. They had to investigate. They had to understand what was really happening. "Stay alert," Ethan ordered, his voice sharp. "We don't know what's down there, but we'll find out." The team moved cautiously toward the source of the sound, their weapons drawn and their eyes scanning every corner of the command center. The layout was labyrinthine, designed to confuse and disorient invaders. The deeper they moved into the base, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. As they neared the center of the facility, the eerie screeching sound grew louder, followed by the sound of something shifting, as if the walls themselves were alive. "Captain," Ethan said, his voice low. "This is it. Something's wrong. This place wasn't just a military base." Daniels nodded grimly. "Whatever's happening, we need to end it now. We're running out of time." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the walls around them began to tremble. Then, in the flickering dimness, the squad saw it. A massive chamber loomed ahead, unlike anything they had encountered. It was vast, its walls adorned with strange alien symbols, ancient and familiar, yet alien at the same time. And in the center of the room stood a towering structure, pulsing with energy, its surface covered in cracks that emitted a faint, eerie glow. It was the source of the scream. Ethan felt the artifact's power stir within him, the energy from the structure resonating with the pulse inside his own body. His mind raced, but one thing became abundantly clear. This wasn't just a Zerak base. It was a place of something much older, something much more dangerous. The artifact, the power it gave him, the strange transmission, it was all connected. And this place, this structure, was the key. Before anyone could react, a dark shape emerged from the shadows, moving faster than Ethan could register. It was as if the room itself had come alive. The real fight was only just beginning. The dark shape in the shadows moved with a deadly grace, its presence sending a chill through the entire squad. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to act, but the figure was faster than anything he had ever encountered before. It darted across the chamber with terrifying speed, its silhouette barely discernible in the flickering light of the alien structure. Ethan's pulse quickened, the power inside him surging to meet the threat. His vision sharpened, his body reacting before his conscious mind had fully processed the danger. He raised his weapon, but the figure was already upon them. In a blur of motion, it closed the distance, and the first soldier in line, Sergeant King, was knocked back with a brutal swipe, crashing into the stone wall with a sickening thud. "Ambush," Ethan shouted, his voice filled with urgency as the squad scrambled to regroup. The creature, or whatever it was, had skin like living shadow, shifting and warping with every movement, almost as if it were part of the darkness itself. It seemed to flicker in and out of existence, moving too fast for the human eye to track. Its face was an eerie mask of pale skin, with hollow eyes and jagged, unnatural teeth that glinted in the dim light. "Open fire," Daniels barked, but the creature was already gone, vanishing back into the shadows with a chilling screech. The squad immediately returned fire, their weapons lighting up the room in quick flashes. But the creature danced around the beams of energy, its movements impossibly fluid. It wasn't just fast, it was otherworldly, almost as if it existed outside the laws of physics. "Stay together," Harper shouted, Her voice strained as she tried to stay focused. "Don't let it divide us." Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't a Zarak. It wasn't even human. This was something else entirely. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting. And from the way it moved, from the way it seemed to know their every move, Ethan realized something more terrifying. This creature wasn't just attacking randomly. It was hunting them. The creature reappeared again, this time darting straight toward Ethan. In a blur of motion, it extended its arm, and Ethan barely managed to duck under the swipe of its claws. The air around him crackled with an energy that was foreign to anything he'd ever encountered. He wasn't just fighting for survival. This was a test of his newfound power. The artifact had awakened something inside him, but would it be enough to stand against whatever this thing was? With a surge of instinct, Ethan reached out, his hand glowing faintly as the energy from the artifact inside him flared to life. For a moment, it felt like time itself slowed. He could feel the creature's movements before it even made them, its every intention flooding his mind. Before it could strike again, Ethan moved. He shot forward, his body propelled by the strange power that now flowed through him. And with a blinding flash of light, his hand slammed into the creature's chest. The force of the blow was so great that it sent the creature flying backward, its body crashing into the far wall of the chamber with a deafening crash. The ground trembled as the creature slumped to the floor, its body flickering in and out of existence, as though it were struggling to stay intact. But it wasn't done. The creature let out a low, guttural growl as it rose to its feet, its form warping and shifting more violently now. Its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowed with an unnatural intensity, and it let out a horrific screech that echoed off the walls of the chamber. The air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. Ethan could feel it now. The artifact inside him was reacting to the creature. It knew what it was. But it wasn't just a power source. It was a key. A key that was tied to this thing, this creature, and possibly to the entire structure they were standing in. "Captain, we need to destroy that thing before it gets any stronger," Harper shouted, firing another round of blasts into the creature. But it was no use. The creature was healing faster than they could damage it. Ethan's mind raced. He could feel the power from the artifact building inside him again, more potent this time, as though it were feeding off his desperation. His heart pounded in his chest, but the unease had turned to determination. He couldn't let this thing escape. He had to stop it before it did whatever it was meant to do. In a flash of insight, Ethan realized what the creature was. It wasn't just an enemy. It was a guardian. A guardian of the artifact, of the structure. It had been waiting for someone to unleash the power within the artifact. And now that someone had arrived, it was coming for them. Ethan took a deep breath, focusing on the energy pulsing inside him. This was no longer about brute force. It was about control. With a whispered command, he channeled the power of the artifact, his entire being resonating with it. The energy surged outward from him in a wave of raw force, sweeping across the chamber and enveloping the creature. The creature let out a final, deafening scream as the energy from the artifact coursed through it, breaking it down at a molecular level, until finally, with a final shudder, it disintegrated into nothing. Silence fell over the chamber. The squad was still, stunned by the sheer power they had witnessed. Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps, his mind spinning with the realization of what he had just done. The power inside him felt infinite, but he was beginning to understand that this wasn't just a gift. It was a burden. And whatever waited for them next would be far worse than anything they had yet encountered. The battle had only just begun. The silence in the chamber was deafening. The creature, once a terrifying force, had been reduced to nothing more than a cloud of ash, disintegrating into the air like smoke. Ethan stood at the center of the room, his body still humming with the power he had just unleashed. The squad remained frozen, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Did you just do that?" Harper asked, her voice shaky as she slowly approached Ethan. He didn't respond immediately. His breath was ragged, his mind still reeling from the raw energy he had just released. The power that had surged through him felt unlike anything he had ever known. It was as if the entire room had bent to his will, as though reality itself had momentarily surrendered to him. The artifact's influence was stronger than ever, and yet something within him resisted. Something was warning him. "Yeah," Ethan finally said, his voice rough. "I think I did." The team exchanged uneasy glances. They had just witnessed the unthinkable. Ethan, the same soldier who had led them through the Zarek base and guided them to victory, had just destroyed a creature of unimaginable power. It wasn't just skill or strength. It was something else entirely, something ancient and unpredictable. "We need to move," Captain Daniel said, his tone grave. "This place isn't safe. If that creature was guarding something, there's a reason. We need to find out what it was protecting." Ethan nodded, but the words didn't fully register. He wasn't concerned about what the creature had been guarding anymore. His mind was still wrapped around the implications of what had just happened. He had tapped into something far beyond what he had intended. The artifact, this strange power coursing through him, was dangerous, but it was also calling to him, beckoning him to explore its depths, to understand it completely. As the squad began to move toward the far end of the chamber, Ethan felt the artifact's pull once again. It was subtle at first, just a hum in the back of his mind, but it grew stronger with each step. The power within him felt like it was awakening, drawing him toward something hidden in the structure. "We're close," Ethan muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Harper turned to him, concern etched on her face. "Close to what?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, "but it's pulling me. We need to keep going." They passed through the dark, winding corridors of the facility, the eerie glow of the strange symbols on the walls flickering as they moved. The deeper they ventured, the more the atmosphere seemed to shift. It was as if the air itself had grown heavier, thicker with an unseen force. Ethan's heightened senses felt it, too, a pulse beneath the floor, a low vibration that echoed through his bones. Finally, they reached a massive door at the end of the hall, its surface covered in the same glowing symbols. Unlike the rest of the facility, this door wasn't just a simple entrance. It was alive. Ethan could feel it in the air, the way the walls seemed to hum in response to their presence. The artifact was urging him forward, its power nearly overwhelming now. "This is it," Ethan said, stepping forward. The door slid open without resistance, revealing a massive chamber beyond, one that made everything else they had seen seem insignificant. Inside the chamber stood a massive stone platform, at the center of which rested an enormous object, bathed in a pulsing light. The object was shaped like a giant crystal, but it radiated an energy that made the air around it shimmer. The artifact inside Ethan stirred, vibrating with anticipation. This is what it's all been about," Ethan whispered, his voice filled with awe. As the squad gathered around the platform, their weapons raised and their eyes scanning for threats, Ethan felt a surge of understanding flood his mind. This crystal, it was the source of the power he had felt all along. It was the key to everything. But as the realization dawned on him, so did another, darker thought. The artifact hadn't just awakened him, it had chosen him for something. He could feel its influence growing stronger, seeping into his very thoughts, manipulating him. The power was intoxicating, and for a moment, Ethan wondered if he could even resist it. But as his hand hovered over the crystal, a sudden voice cut through the chaos in his mind. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice was familiar, but distorted, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ethan's head snapped up, scanning the chamber. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice steady despite the rising unease. "You've unlocked something far beyond your control," the voice said. "And now it's too late to turn back." Ethan's pulse quickened. It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. But before he could react, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and the chamber began to collapse in on itself. The true danger was just beginning. The ground rumbled violently beneath Ethan's feet as the chamber began to shake. The walls cracked, and a deep, resonating hum filled the air. The pulsing crystal at the center of the room flickered erratically, its light growing more intense, casting eerie shadows across the squad. It was as if the entire facility was reacting to their presence, to the artifact's power. "We need to get out of here now," Captain Daniels shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The squad moved swiftly, but the ground beneath them trembled so violently that it was becoming hard to keep their footing. The stone walls cracked and splintered, dust falling in thick clouds. It felt like the entire structure was collapsing around them. Ethan felt the artifact's presence within him flare, as if it were calling to the crystal. The energy inside him surged, powerful and unrelenting. His vision blurred with the intensity of the force, and for a moment he could see the past and the future swirling together, images of ancient civilizations and unknown futures flashing before his eyes. The voice, now clearer, more distinct, spoke again, and it was closer, almost as if it were inside his head. "It was never meant to be yours. You have unleashed something that should have remained buried." The voice echoed through his mind like 1,000 whispers, and his hands trembled as he fought to regain control. The crystal pulsed again, brighter now, and the floor beneath him cracked open, revealing the deep abyss. Ethan could feel something rising from that darkness, something ancient and powerful, something that had been trapped for centuries. "We can't outrun this," Harper shouted, looking around frantically. "What the hell is going on?" Ethan's mind raced. He knew what was happening now. The crystal wasn't just a source of power, it was a containment device. It had been holding something far more dangerous, far more terrifying than anything they had encountered before. And now, with the artifact awakening in him, it was breaking free. "It's not a weapon," Ethan said through gritted teeth, his voice hoarse with effort. "It's a prison, and we've just broken the seal." At that moment, the ground beneath them split wide open, and from the depths of the chamber, an enormous, monstrous shape began to emerge. A massive figure, humanoid but with features twisted beyond recognition, its skin like dark, cracked stone, its eyes glowing with an unholy light. The creature's presence was suffocating, overwhelming. It radiated an ancient power that seemed to warp the very fabric of reality around it. The air became thick with tension as it rose from the abyss, its movements slow but deliberate. Its massive hands reached out, grasping at the walls of the chamber as it climbed toward them. "We need to stop it," Ethan shouted, his voice filled with urgency. He could feel the artifact's power intensifying, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Without thinking, Ethan drew from the raw energy inside him, calling upon the artifact's power to fuel his every move. His body surged forward, faster than he had ever moved before, and with a burst of energy, he launched himself toward the creature. The squad followed his lead, opening fire on the behemoth, but the blasts seemed to have no effect, dissipating against its dark, stone-like skin. Ethan reached the creature first, his fist glowing with pure energy as he struck at its chest. The force of the blow was enough to stagger the creature, but it didn't fall. Instead, it snarled, the sound vibrating through the air like thunder. Ethan recoiled as the energy from the creature's body pushed him back. He could feel it trying to absorb the power from the artifact within him, twisting the energy and using it against him. His body burned with the strain, his muscles screaming as the artifact's power threatened to overwhelm him. "This isn't enough," Ethan muttered to himself, realizing that the creature was more than just a physical threat. It was feeding off the very energy he was trying to control. Then, an idea struck him. He needed to do more than fight the creature. He needed to contain it. The crystal, the artifact. Everything had been about balance. He couldn't destroy it, but he could lock it away again. "Harper, Daniels," Ethan yelled. "We need to get to the crystal. It's the key." Without waiting for a response, Ethan charged back toward the crystal, his body pulsing with power. The ground trembled beneath him, and he could hear the squad following closely behind. They reached the platform just as the creature lunged at them, its enormous claws swinging with deadly intent. With all the power he could muster, Ethan slammed his hands onto the crystal, channeling the energy of the artifact into it. The room lit up with a blinding flash as the energy from the crystal and the artifact collided. Ethan could feel his body burning as the power surged through him, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. The creature was still coming. The crystal's light grew brighter, and with a deafening roar, the massive shape of the creature was pulled back toward the abyss. It struggled, its dark form writhing and twisting in the air, but slowly it was sucked back into the depths from which it came. The chamber trembled one last time as the seal reasserted itself, and the creature vanished from sight. The room fell silent. Ethan collapsed to his knees, the artifact's power finally ebbing away from him. His body was drained, exhausted from the effort, and for a moment, he thought he might lose consciousness. "We did it," Harper said, her voice soft with relief. Ethan didn't answer. He was too focused on the hum of the artifact within him, the energy still vibrating through his body, urging him forward. But even as they stood victorious, Ethan knew this was far from over. The power of the artifact, the creature, the unknown force that had orchestrated it all. These were just the beginning. There were far greater challenges waiting in the darkness, and Ethan was only beginning to understand what it meant to wield this power.